Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of this series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Encouraging Boredom in Our Lives. The talk was given by Matthew Files on April 12, 2025 via Zoom. Matthew facilitates groups that support people to look deeper into their process, formulate their own questions, and become responsible for their choices. In this talk, he states that boredom is useful and may even be necessary on the path, and that we can be with it in everyday life as well as in meditation. He discusses distinctions that the Tibetan Buddhist master Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche makes about hot boredom, which is agitating and which we typically seek to remedy or alleviate, and cool boredom, which is refreshing. Aspects of the nuance of relating with boredom are brought out in the questions and comments of those who attended the talk. Matthew considers some of the teaching of Werner Erhard and an expression of his own teacher, Lee Lozowick, toward the end of the presentation. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Matthew Files.
I've got a lot of things from Chogyam Trungpa that I want to read and comment on, talk about. My boredom inspired me to do this talk on boredom. And then I had to go find some dharma to back it all up with, because, isn't that what we do? We have a certain position in life, and then we find dharma to back it up with. So we know, I'm on the right track. So anyway, that's what I did. So I was thinking of all kinds of spiritual topics, talk about meditation or compassion or devotion or non-duality. And it was all just so boring. And the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, everything is really boring to me. Life is boring to me. I have this job. I'm a window cleaner. Do you know how boring it is to clean windows? It's boring. I know other window cleaners. They've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and they just want to get out of it because it's so boring. And most people listen to some podcast or music or something while they're cleaning because it's so boring. I remember many years ago, I was up in Boulder, Colorado, and somebody took me to one of these big health clubs with 40 or 50 bicycle stations and weight rooms and treadmills. The place was huge. I'd never been in a place like this before. And I walked around and I noticed that almost everybody had headphones on, listening to something. And I'm going, oh, wow, this is really fascinating. People want to get in shape, but they just don't want to be there when it's happening. They want to be somewhere else because getting in shape is really boring and it's hard work. So anyway, that's where this talk is coming from, is my own boredom with pretty much everything. And that's one form of boredom, is a lack of interest in things. It could be incidental. It's interesting that most times when I read about boredom, so I was online the other day, just looking at articles on boredom, almost all of them are about what to do about boredom, how to alleviate boredom. One of them had lists of things you could do so you wouldn't be bored. And I couldn't help but feeling that they were all missing the point about boredom, because I find boredom actually to be quite useful and perhaps even necessary. It's something that goes way back. Anybody remember being a kid and going, Mom, I'm bored. Mom, I'm bored. How many moms ever said, oh, that's great, Sonny. Just be with your boredom. Whose mom ever said that? They said, oh, go out and play, call up a friend, do a puzzle, put together a model. anything to keep from being bored. Because I think culturally, boredom has quite a negative connotation, like it's something that shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be bored ever. And maybe there's even something wrong with me if I'm bored. But frankly, some people are just freaking boring. And sometimes certain events encouraging boredom. Whoever puts on a video, sit down to watch a video, and it's really just boring, and you watch it till the end. I rarely do that myself. But is that really any different than sitting in meditation and being with your boredom when boredom shows up? Sitting with boredom rather than changing the channel. But even in meditation, that tends to be what we do. We change the channel. By changing the channel, I mean thinking a different thought or thinking some thought, because no thoughts is really boring, but it's really easy to be entertained in meditation with thinking about yesterday's events or tomorrow's events, or being entertained by all the sensations, most of them being pain in your back or your legs, and being entertained by all that. There's no end to the entertainment. You held up your cell phone there. That's a major source of entertainment. Waiting at the doctor's office, sitting at the dentist, sitting at lunch by myself. And rather than just eating my lunch, pick up my cell phone and scroll through stuff so I don't have to be bored by this boring lunch that I have the same thing every day. No, it's not the same thing. My salads do have some variation to them. Yeah, so that was my inspiration, like nothing being interesting, nothing being exciting, stimulating. I find it to be a very uncomfortable place to be in. And I do the best I can not to try to remedy that situation. Doing the best I can not to remedy the discomfort, find an option to it. When I started thinking about this, I need some support for my talk here. So I immediately went to Chogyam Trungpa, the myth of freedom, things like that, where he talks a lot about meditation and how even you meditate for a while and you have this sensation of, I'm really getting somewhere. I'm progressing. And that's just total entertainment. And the way he talks about it, it takes a while for all the fascination with the nuances of meditation to get over it, to get over ourselves. What is the myth of freedom and
coming through spiritual materialism?
Yeah, coming through spiritual materialism. There's this great thing in there where he's talking about the Japanese tea ceremony. And he talks about, like, as Westerners, we get fascinated with the nuances of the Japanese tea ceremony and just how you stir the tea and the right pot that you pour it in and the right cup you serve it in and the right temperature, all this, it's fascinating. And he says all that fascination has to be at some point dropped away before you can actually appreciate what the tea ceremony is about. Because that's not the heart of the Japanese tea ceremony, is all those nuances. But he says, as Westerners, we fascinate over those kinds of things because our minds want to be entertained. That's when boredom shows up, is when there's these gaps of no entertainment. So the talk for me is about encouraging those gaps to happen just in ordinary life. Most of what he talks about has to do with meditation and the boredom experience in meditation. But I'm thinking about, well, since I'm not much of a meditator, I have to find that outside of that meditation space. Because the way he talks about the value of boredom, I've found that myself just in ordinary things. It's a naturally occurring thing when I allow my mind to stop making everything special. I'm reading from the Myth of Freedom here. And Chogyam Trungpa says, boredom is important because boredom is anti-credential. Credentials are entertaining, always bringing you something new, something lively, something fantastic, all kinds of solutions. When you take away the idea of credentials, then there is boredom. So when I was reading that, I was thinking of an old Chinese curse, but I checked with the Oracle, Google. And the Oracle said, there's really no proof of that it's Chinese, don't know where it came from, but it works. The curse is, may you be born in interesting times. And these are seriously interesting times we live in, given everything that's going on in the world, particularly in this country. And so I hear that and I go, yeah, that was spoken by somebody that knew something about how interesting times distract us from spiritual practice, from paying attention to ourselves. And that's the curse. It's a curse to be distracted in everything that's going on outside of this. But it's also what's going on inside of this can also be the very same distraction. Inside of this, let's call it our inner work, our inner life. But then I go, okay, inner. What do you mean by inner? In here, there's kidneys and liver, intestines. You're talking about that? Where is this inner that we talk about? Inner tends to refer to the unseen, which I think is a much better word rather than inner, because I'm not convinced that it is actually inner. But unseen, yes. The exterior is seen. It's obvious to everyone. But like you were saying here, the credentials, bringing us something new, something lively, something fantastic. So even in the realm of what's generally unseen to others can be fantastic, have all kinds of solutions, can always be something lively, like the next great insight into my psychology. What a rat's nest that is. Or the great next insight into some dharmic consideration. And I think it's only when those great insights actually become boring, that they start to have any meaning at all. Not that they go away, but they don't have the same magnetic pull. There's not this excitement around them. And that's one of the things Trungpa's talking about. He talks about in the Hinayana path with vipassana meditation. He says the point of vipassana meditation is to get bored. He says that's the whole point of it. He also said, I read him somewhere else, which really changed the way I looked at meditation. He was saying he doesn't consider meditation a spiritual practice. He says it's a tool for working with the mind and emotions. That's it. That's all it is. It's a tool for working with the mind and emotions. That really grounded something for me in terms of, my own highfalutin spiritual ideas about what could be done with meditation and the exalted planes of existence I could go into and all the bhavas and samadhis that could be explored in meditation. All that kind of silliness, which is what he's talking about in terms of credentials. I was on this website. It's called the Non-Duality Salon, where they talk about non-duality. And this one guy who's a Buddhist practitioner, he was on there and he must have been 2 paragraphs worth of, him talking about all the teachers he sat with and all the things he got from them and all this stuff. And I was going, that's some serious credentials you got there. He actually says some good stuff. I like his things he posts, but all his credentials was a bit over the top. So Trungpa, he makes a distinction between hot boredom and cool boredom. He says hot boredom is like a sauna. And the idea of going to a sauna is really wonderful because you think about it, it's going to be hot and you're going to sweat and you're going to have some purification happen. But he says hot boredom is when you go to the sauna and somebody locks the door and you can't get out. and it's just hot and really uncomfortable. And he says, that's the first kind of boredom that you come in contact with, is hot boredom. And he says, you have to just be with the hot boredom. He was giving a talk one time about being in hell, or maybe somebody asked him the question, what do you do when you find yourself in hell? And he says, I do my best to stay there. I think boredom is the same way. I think the importance of boredom is when you find yourself there, is just to stay there. Do the best you can to stay there. And sometimes it is like a hot sauna with the door locked and you can't get out. And the common phrase is being bored to tears or bored to death. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. I just want it to stop. You're listening to a talk, maybe. You go into a Dharma talk, like this one, perhaps. And you're sitting there, the person's just like telling stories. And they're rambling on and they're telling jokes. Maybe it's a teacher, you like them. You came for some good food, some good juice. And they're just telling jokes and stories about their life. And you're bored. That thing is not getting fed. The thing you came for, the Dharma, the thing you can chew on, make meaning out of. It's not there, and it's boring. So let me read something else about boredom, more from the Myth of Freedom. There are definite styles of boredom. The Zen tradition in Japan creates a definite style of boredom in its monasteries. Sit, cook, eat, sit zazen, and do your walking meditation, and so on. But to an American novice who goes to Japan or take part in traditional Japanese practice in this country, the message of boredom is not communicated properly. Instead, if I may say so, it turns into a militant appreciation of rigidity or an aesthetic appreciation of simplicity rather than actually being bored. So I was thinking about the thing he said at the beginning, this definite style of boredom in monasteries. Sit, cook, eat, sit zazen, do your walking meditation. Everything is very regimented. It's very predictable. And as far as encouraging boredom in our everyday lives, we don't have to go to a monastery to do that. We can live that kind of life, a regular, disciplined life, not even disciplined. I mean, it takes discipline, but basically it's doing the same thing every day at the same time as best you can. I'm not even talking about meditation or exercise, just having that structure of doing the same thing, even as simple as getting up at the same time every day, reading the newspaper at the same time every day, going to the work at the same time every day, having dinner. But the mind doesn't want that. That's boring. Mind wants excitement, or it wants its own thing. I want to get up when I want to get up. I'll go to bed when I want to go to bed. I don't want to have oatmeal every day for breakfast. And I'm not saying anybody should. I do mostly, but I'm kind of weird. But having a regular schedule, that's really freaking boring. So I think everybody relates to the boringness he talks about being in a Zen monastery and going, oh yeah, that would be really boring, but really valuable. But do we do it in our own lives? Do we encourage that same sense of boredom in our own lives? If we recognize the value in it, you're probably not going to do that on your own if you don't already recognize the value of experiencing boredom. Another thing I found reading just various things about boredom was mostly referencing what to do when boredom shows up. And I was thinking, well, what if boredom's a constant? What if it's not a matter of when boredom shows up? What if boredom is just a constant in life? Like I laugh when talking sometimes with people and somebody will say something like, oh yeah, that makes it really hard when ego shows up. And I'm like, dude, ego's showing up all the time. It's on 24 hours a day. It's not like it just shows up at these moments when you're having a hissy fit. That's not the limitations of ego at all. So it's kind of like that. But let me go on about what he's talking about here. So he talks about the rigidity or an aesthetic appreciation of simplicity. And that's how he was talking about the tea ceremony. Westerners get fascinated by the simplicity, the appreciation of the aesthetics of the tea ceremony. And he says, you're totally missing the point. Actually, it was not designed to be that way. To the Japanese, Zen practice is an ordinary Japanese life situation in which you just do your daily work and sit a lot of zazen. But Americans appreciate the little details, how you use your bowl and how you eat consciously in zazen posture. This is only supposed to create a feeling of boredom. But to American students, it's a work of art. Cleaning your bowl, washing it out, folding your white napkin, and so forth becomes living theater. The black cushion is supposed to suggest no color, complete boredom. But for American, it inspires a mentality of militant blackness and straightforwardness. And I just love that. I love Trungpa, his straightforwardness, describing how easy it is for the Western mind to miss the point of being bored. The tradition is trying to bring out boredom, which is a necessary aspect of the narrow path of discipline. But instead, the practice turns out to be an archaeological, sociological survey of interesting things to do, something you could tell your friends about. Last year, I spent the whole fall sitting in a Zen monastery for 6 months. Credentials. I watched autumn turn into winter, and I did my zazen practice, and everything was so precise and beautiful. I learned how to sit, and I even learned how to walk and eat. It was a wonderful experience, and I did not get bored at all. That's called missing the point. You tell your friends, go, it's great fun, and you collect another credential. The attempt to destroy credentials creates another credential. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the talk, it's only going to be a half hour long. No, that's April Fool's. Sorry, this is my joke. Keep you from being bored, a little entertainment. Questions, welcome anytime. Opinions, not so much.
So when you were mentioning the routine, having a routine, I was thinking that also eliminates uncertainty, which is another thing that I think is worth facing.
That having a routine?
It eliminates uncertainty. So some fear. It alleviates fear.
Okay, thank you.
Question, why opinions not so much?
Because I'm putting the burden on you to voice the opinion by way of a question.
Okay, so I'm back with a question. Do you think that boredom is more worthwhile to explore or to be with than uncertainty? And if so, why?
I don't know if it's an either or thing, actually, but I think in boredom, there is no uncertainty. Boredom is a very certain thing. It's very concrete. It's very solid. So it's very certain that way. There's no doubt as to its presence. At the same time, uncertainty, if you follow the news, follow the politics of this land we live in, which I follow more these days than I ever have in my life, ever. I've never done this before, but I'm fascinated by it, like a slow train wreck, watching a slow train wreck in action. But there's tons of uncertainty in the air these days, in everything that's happening. Things are very uncertain. And I think it would be a mistake to shy away from uncertainty. I'm not talking about worrying about it, the uncertainty, but to live a life protected from uncertainty would be a mistake. Because in a bigger picture than just the politics of this country, life is uncertain. If you found yourself shying away from uncertainty, engaging in a life that was protecting you from uncertainty, that would be something to investigate.
I think that's what routine does.
Maybe I need a specific on that.
Well, just the example you gave about reading the newspaper at the same time, having the same type of meal, having things planned out as exactly as possible, I think is in part to work with that.
Well, I think I'm going to disagree with that buffers you from uncertainty, because you can die reading the newspaper. There's no certainty.
It doesn't actually protect you, but it sort of provides you with the illusion. Like that's the reason for it.
Okay. All right. Yes, I suppose it could. And that would be something, again, to look at. If that were a reason for taking up that kind of formal, structured life, that was the purpose of it, that would definitely be something to investigate if you're trying to buffer yourself in some way from uncertainty. So I've just found that nothing can buffer me from that, really, from uncertainty. That's the nature of life, is uncertainty, no matter what I do.
You mentioned boredom being a gap. And I feel like a gap is more neutral, and that boredom is a narration of agitation.
Yes, the gap is where boredom will show up. There's nothing wrong with the gap, but that's where boredom comes in, because mind says something's wrong here.
When I'm trying to look at what boredom is to me, I think it becomes boredom when there's a tinge of agitation. Then it's called boredom.
Yeah, I think agitation is generally associated with boredom. It's uncomfortable being somewhere and there's nothing going on here. There's nothing happening here. I need some excitement. I need some entertainment. I need some stimulation. That's agitation. I'm not sure if one creates the other, but they definitely go hand in hand. They're kind of married that way. But that's hot boredom. I'll get to cool boredom in a bit. Trungpa talks about cool boredom. But it's difficult to get to cool boredom without touching on hot boredom somewhere along the line.
I just am noticing that I think it's hard to define boredom.
Yeah, I'm completely unmoored to this subject. I know boredom to be either a result of being tired or, as I've heard said, and I believe, and now I'm giving an opinion, lack of gratitude. So the antidote is to get rest or have gratitude. And I can't see any reason to encourage boredom or learn from it. I think you may be talking about the value of routine or maybe of simplicity, the oatmeal every day and so forth. I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about.
Okay, that's fair enough. Then let me go on. Let me see if further things will become self-explanatory as I go on. Let me read some more from the Honorable Chogyam Trungpa. The fear of boredom often keeps people from meditation. I hear it all the time. You mean I'm just supposed to sit there doing nothing? I'll be bored to death. We're afraid there will be nothing to entertain us, nothing to hold our interest. In meditation, we're isolating ourselves. First, we isolate the body in a very quiet place with as little external stimulation as possible. We place it on a cushion in a very simple posture. Then we isolate our mind. We place it upon the breath and practice keeping it there. Eventually, we reduce the number of thoughts. If we're able to slow down and abide in our internal space, we'll begin to appreciate the lack of stimulation in meditation compared to the chaos of normal life. But we will be bored at times because we won't always want to be where we are. There are several kinds of boredom. One kind of boredom has an undercurrent of anxiety. We're not altogether comfortable with ourselves. We sit down to meditate. We suddenly have no external amusement. Our senses are habituated to speed and stimulation. Without being stimulated, we find no way to satisfy ourselves. We feel stir crazy, like a child with nothing to do. The agitation wants to reach for something to fill the space. If we were waiting at the airport or the doctor's office, we'd reach for a magazine, the cell phone, or a computer game. But in meditation, there's nothing to reach for. We try to cope by making our own entertainment instead of following the breath. We'll amuse ourselves with a little sound or the movements of an insect. Watching others meditate in front of us can seem as interesting as a full-length feature film. So even that, the lengths mind will go to keep from being bored, watching an insect. If you're sitting with other people, say in a meditation hall, and watching the back of someone's head and having a thought stream about it, anything to keep from not having thoughts going on. Thoughts are very entertaining. We're entertaining ourselves constantly, all day long, with a kind of subconscious chatter about this, that, and the other thing. I used to have a favorite driving in the car thought loop when I'd be driving, and it was about winning the lottery, the big lottery. I don't mean $10,000. I'm talking like the $350 million lottery. And I had this thought loop, and I would get into driving, and it doesn't take much to drive, so you can think a lot. And I think about winning the lottery and all these things that I could do with money and all this fantastic stuff. And that's boring now. I used to really entertain myself with that. And that's completely boring now. It really sucks because now I just have to sit in the car and drive. I don't have this fantastic thought loop about what I could do with $350 million. Here's a little thing it says about gaps. In everyday life, we habitually try to conceal the gaps in our experience of mind and body. These gaps are a bit like an awkward silence around the table at a dinner party. A good host is supposed to keep the conversation going with his or her guests to put them at ease. You might talk about the weather or the latest books you've read or what you're serving for dinner. We treat ourselves similarly. We occupy ourselves with subconscious chatter because we're uncomfortable with any gaps in our conversation with ourselves. The purpose of the practice of meditation is to experience these gaps. And just to experience these gaps, and they don't just happen in meditation. Although that tends to be a really ideal place to see them because there's so much less going on in our lives than at any other time. This next bit is not Trungpa, it's Fabrice Midal. He wrote a book about Trungpa. Trungpa Rinpoche is insistent that while sitting meditation is rewarding in itself, we should not become too excited about our meditation experiences. Instead, we should concentrate on becoming aware of a less celebrated state of mind, which he terms cool boredom. For Trungpa, this boredom is a sign that our meditation experience is developing and something we should embrace with enthusiasm rather than growing dejected about a perceived lack of progressiveness. This seems to be a very helpful instruction on Trungpa's part because many meditators understandably expect their meditative efforts to constantly bring new and novel experiences, if not continually, then at least intermittently. When we have the experience of cool boredom, we may interpret this as a symptom of reaching an impasse in our spiritual progress because it has none of the characteristics of anecdotal experience. According to Trungpa, however, it's necessary for us to go through this kind of boredom. This experience is unique to meditation and is designated cool because it is actually quite refreshing. As Trungpa Rinpoche consistently emphasizes, there are many beneficial aspects to be had from this experience. And Trungpa says, boredom has many aspects. There is a sense that nothing is happening, that something might happen, or even that we would like to happen might replace that which is not happening. Or one might appreciate boredom as a delight. The practice of meditation could be described as relating with cool boredom, refreshing boredom, boredom like a mountain stream. It refreshes because we do not have to do anything or expect anything. As we realize that nothing is happening, strangely, we begin to realize that something dignified is happening. There is no room for frivolity, no room for speed. We just breathe and we are there. That was actually Trungpa's words, and that's very different than the hot boredom, the boredom of being locked in the sauna, the really uncomfortable boredom of, I just need to get out of here because I don't have the stimulation that I want to have, that I need, because I was born in interesting times and I want to experience all those interesting things, good and bad. That's where I live anyway. When it comes to death and attachment, I'm attached to the experiencer, to experiencing. And death is the end of that. That's a horrifying notion to me. Like, I'm not attached relatively, comparatively to money, anything in the domain of money, food, and sex. Nothing compared to the attachment to just experiencing whatever this thing experiences. And like, death is the end of that. It's over, finished, end of the game. No more experiencing, as far as I can tell. So anyway, that was just a little side note.
Would you say that the bridge from hot boredom to cool boredom would just be acceptance of the boredom?
No, I would not use that language. I think I know what you mean, but I have an aversion to the word acceptance. I prefer the language of being with. So being with the boredom. Acceptance, just the language of it, it's just a language thing, because we may very well be talking about the same thing, but it's a language thing for me. And to me, the language of acceptance leaves a lot of room for things to become basically just another credential. Yes, I accept my anger, that kind of thing. It's just another credential, another addition to the success story of me. And to me, being with, it's a little more open-ended. Acceptance implies some sort of liking. But being with is being with it whether I like it or not. It doesn't invalidate not liking. It doesn't invalidate liking. It's just being with.
Well, that's different than encouraging being with. How I'm relating to this is considering that who I am at a deeper level or an essential level is what exists when there's no thought, when there's just being. And what happens all day long if I observe, when I observe, is that there's always thought going on, which is, all about me, identified and goal-oriented about something or other. And that when that stops or slows down and that's not going on, then there's boredom. But wouldn't encouraging boredom be the same thing of being goal-oriented, trying to attain in some way? The way that being with is language that resonates more with me rather than encouraging.
Yeah. I don't think encouraging boredom in everyday life isn't any different than going into meditation, knowing that its purpose is to create boredom.
That would be its purpose?
Yeah. Well, that's riffing off of what Trungpa was saying. He says that's the point of meditation practice, is to be bored, because it takes all the fascination out of it. It takes all the sense of achievement out of it, of success out of it. It totally pops the balloon of all our projections around what should, could, is supposed to happen in meditation.
Well, his distinction between cool and hot boredom makes some sense to me, because if I'm understanding that right, boredom isn't always irritating.
Right.
The word that's occurring to me is equanimity. Maybe there's just equanimity. Or would you distinguish that from boredom?
No, actually, equanimity is extremely boring. Yeah, equanimity is horribly boring.
I'm not sure that I agree with that, but
Oh, I thought that's what you were saying.
no. I was thinking that when there's equanimity, there's peace. for a change in my life.
Yeah. And peace is horribly boring. That's me personally. I'm not quoting Trungpa there.
They say heaven is boring. You just walk around with a halo on your head and a harp, and
Yeah.
every day is the same. It's like Dullsville.
Yeah. There's not even any trees or plants. It's just clouds.
So is that desirable?
Not to me.
Well, we've got enough distraction, so we don't have to experience that, I guess.
Yeah. That's the whole thing about encouraging boredom, encouraging the space for boredom to arise in, rather than going for all those distractions, rather than being caught up in all those distractions.
There's a lot of power in that, in being with what is.
There is.
So I think you're speaking about silence in a way that points to how we are constantly clutching at objects in consciousness, and that we can feel uncomfortable with that silence, and we think there should be objects there, and that you're pointing to the whole point of the endeavor that we are on. Why we meditate, it's because we are seeking that silence. We're seeking that identity which is not based on any objects. And I guess boredom is where we have this notion that a silence shouldn't be there, or we don't know what to do with it. That's my interpretation of what you're saying.
Boredom has this piercing quality to it. Like surrendering into boredom, maybe that's cool boredom. It's just letting myself be pierced by this experience that I would like very much to fend off or hold at a safe distance. It's actually letting myself be pierced by this experience of boredom, the helplessness of it. It's just surrendering to that helplessness. That's why it's something I resist so much.
Yeah.
I wonder, is boredom a big part of our lives? Is it for you? I don't recognize it so much.
It is for me right now. I have to say that. That's why I'm doing this talk. That's what's relevant for me is boredom. So I figured I'd explore it with you all. For many people, it may not be a relevant thing. Maybe it comes up every once in a while. For me, it's a relative constant. When I think of not being bored, things get my attention. This interests me, or that interests me, or that's exciting, or that's noteworthy. None of that. There's nothing that interests me. And I was listening to this song today by Bruce Springsteen called Dancing in the Dark. And he opens up this song and he's, it's like, wake up in the morning, have my coffee, go to work. I come home and I'm just tired and bored with myself. To me, that's a lot of what is boredom. That's what it is. It's being bored with oneself, where I am no longer entertaining to myself. My thoughts are no longer entertaining to myself. They don't fascinate anymore. Not that they don't happen. The notion of being thoughtless is like beyond my comprehension. They're like, oh yeah, those thoughts again. Jeez, why are you bothering me with these thoughts? But then that extends out to everybody else who's talking. Why are you bothering me with your thoughts? I'm bored enough with my own thoughts. So why are you impinging on me with your thinking? Because it's just boring.
It seems like being bored requires feeling offended.
That's not my experience. Not at all. There's very little that offends me. But I was just thinking of this quote from Werner Erhard. Life is empty and meaningless. And the fact that life is empty and meaningless is empty and meaningless. And he goes on to say that the only meaning in life is the meaning we give it. There's no inherent meaning to anything. That's boring. Having no inherent meaning to anything. So we give it meaning to entertain ourselves, whether it's the spiritual path or doesn't matter what it is. We give meaning individually to everything in our lives. It's not there innately. There is no meaning to life.
How do we know that?
Well, I don't know how we know that. It might not even be true. I think it is. What do I base that on? I would call it experience, or just what I've seen about life, or what I've seen about myself, and how giving meaning to things, yeah, that's something that this brain does, gives meaning to things. And it's okay if you don't understand it. I was at a customer's house the other day cleaning windows. We were talking, I was telling her about my business, and she says, it must be really hard to get employees these days. She says, I don't know what it is. It just seems like everybody has a hard time finding good employees. And she's going on about the culture of this and the culture of that, and generation, whatever, has no work ethic. Anyway, she's going, I don't understand. I don't understand at all. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, and you don't have to. You don't have to understand it at all. I said, the older I get, I understand less and less things I thought I understood before. And she's like, yeah, that's totally true. I don't have to understand that. I know exactly what you're talking about. That was a great little experience I had with that lady. Great little communion we had about another Werner Erhard quote, knowing that understanding is the booby prize. That's a direct quote from Werner Erhard. Understanding is the booby prize.
When you mentioned you're bored with yourself,
Yeah.
the way you were talking about it has a certain mood to it, and boredom can have a certain mood, like a dark cloud mood to it.
Yeah.
The way he speaks about cool boredom is exactly the opposite mood. It's
Yes.
not this dark mood. When you started to talk about your boredom, bored with life and bored with your thought,
Yeah.
it was not attractive at all.
No, it's not. It's not cool boredom. Cool boredom is something completely different.
Yeah, this is the idea of carrying your own cross is not like dragging your own cross. It's like carrying with dignity. And the mood is very different.
Yeah, he talks about it as being very refreshing and spacious. Here, I'll read another thing from him. He says, hot boredom is like being locked in a padded cell. You are bored, miserable, and irritated. You will probably experience lots of that in your meditation practice. Beyond that, however, with cool boredom, you don't feel imprisoned. Cool boredom is quite spacious, and it creates further softness and sympathy towards ourselves. In that space, we are no longer afraid of allowing ourselves to experience a gap. In other words, we realize that existence does not depend on constantly cranking up our egomaniacal machine. There is another way of existing. So, yeah, mostly what I'm describing for myself is hot boredom, is not cool boredom. But he's saying you have to go through hot boredom. You have to be with hot boredom a lot. So my talking about my own hot boredom and just being with it. So I'm not inclined at all to try to do anything to alleviate it, to relieve it, to remedy it. And to me, that is just being with it, just allowing it, sitting next to it on a park bench.
Including not expressing the irritation when you say, I'm already bored with my own thoughts, so please don't give me your thoughts. I'm totally bored with what you're talking to me about. That's not a being with hot boredom.
No, that's right. I do my best at not expressing that, but it is definitely a thought loop that goes on in my brain. That's part of that hot boredom. And I do my best not to lay that on other people when I'm in the midst of their boringness. But it's not cool boredom by any stretch of the imagination. And even reading about cool boredom, it doesn't inspire me. Oh, there's something I need to attain cool boredom. I need to attain that particular state or whatever. It's just like, oh, so there actually is something else. Like he says at the end of this, there is another way of existing. And then just being with that. rather than doing anything of volitional will to try to attain that. And that's been a struggle, a constant struggle through all my years of practice, on the path. And whatever I thought needed to be attained, but there was always something. Being a good devotee or a good practitioner or whatever it was, this ideal that I set up for myself of something to attain. And I usually worked at it somewhat half-heartedly, but still, it doesn't matter. The intention was the same as somebody who really was diligent about attaining it. I just don't have the temperament for that kind of discipline. But it doesn't matter. That's just different characters. But it's the whole impetus to attain that I find sort of dissolving. We have these every other week meetings, these Dharma sharings, and oftentimes people bring stories about Tibetan or Hindu saints or practitioners and doing all this heroic stuff. And like the people who are reading it, these little pastors are really inspired by it, like something to like motivate their practice. And I'm totally boring to me. Totally boring. I have no interest in like even attempting to attain something like that.
When I find myself in what you describe as hot boredom,
yeah,
I would tend to think if I was a good practitioner, I would go on my cushion right now and get it over with, go through it so that I arrive to cool boredom.
Right.
Or if I'm not a good practitioner in my mind, then I reach for a book or I reach for food or I reach for something to fill the gap.
Yes.
But the way you describe yourself is neither of these things will do. You would have to endure this for years until something clicks.
Yes.
That's awful. That's an awful prospect.
Yeah.
I can't imagine I will let myself be bored for years.
Oh, to me, I have no other choice. That's the way I look at it. Doing it the way I'm doing it is the only way I can do it that makes any sense to me at all. Because I've tried remedying things. I've tried remedying moods and emotions, all that stuff that I thought should be remedied or done something about to change them. And it didn't work. So it leaves me with no choice except to be with things the way they are right now, for as long as they are.
Trungpa said, there's another way of existing.
Yeah.
It seems if I give meaning to life, okay, like I have to succeed or something, then I'm motivated, or I need something, I have to accumulate credentials. I'm motivated in some way. But if I see that there's no meaning to life, that it is just what it is, there's no hope in attaining something, maybe I lose my motivation. And maybe part of the process is just being bored as the mind just runs itself out. And you see that it's a lost cause to keep trying to attain, and it's never going to happen.
I think losing our motivation is an important thing to have happen.
But it seems to me that the great masters have been very engaged. It doesn't seem they've been bored. So what is that other way of existing? What motivates great masters? And where does that come from?
Well, not being a great master, I would have no idea what motivates them. It'd be sheer speculation on my part. But when he says there's another way of existing, what I thought he was referring to was cool boredom rather than hot boredom. There was that consideration earlier about equanimity. And to me, that's what a lot of these masters have is equanimity. And I think that's inherent in cool boredom. So maybe what they have is cool boredom.
But it seems also that they've been pretty motivated. I don't know if that's the right word.
I don't sense any contradiction between cool boredom and motivation. Cool boredom is more like a disposition.
What I'm getting to is I'm interested in where that comes from, because the motivation that I've known really is this motivation to attain something. Yeah. And as that's run itself down, then you're face to face with yourself more. But there is this other kind of urge, it seems, that springs from emptiness or from some other place.
Yeah, and an urge might be very different than motivation. I'm thinking of all the times that Lee had said, well, at least there's dinner to look forward to. And in considering this topic of boredom, I'm going, I wonder that there was this cool boredom behind that because everything was kind of evened out. Like I think most of us are always looking forward to something exciting, something new and different, something stimulating, whether it's a good book or a walk in the woods.
Teachers like Gurdjieff or many masters in different traditions really pushed their students, though. It wasn't just peace and love hanging around in equanimity.
Right.
I mean, some probably were that way, Ramana Maharshi or maybe Swami Ramdas, but many were not.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of peace and love myself. If I had a teacher who just preached peace and love, I think I'd be even more bored than I am now.
Well, we had that in the 60s, I guess. These days, we have something else.
It doesn't seem to me that equanimity would be about peace and love more than it would be about no hope. Like what you're talking about, core wisdom, and what Trungpa talks about, no hope, hoping for something to make things better. So if I have no hope, I'm far from having no hope. But if I try to feel into what it would mean, you mentioned the word disposition.
Yeah.
It's a very subtle mood, actually.
Yes.
And it wouldn't restrain even from being grateful about the beauty of the landscape as I'm walking, but I wouldn't grab onto it. It's very subtle, actually. We're talking about something very subtle that wouldn't affect activity necessarily.
Except subtly.
Except subtly. Except in the mood in which I do this activity.
Yeah. Hope and hopelessness go together. There's a quote I like about when you give up hopelessness, hope goes with it, or something like that.
Thank you. This was very interesting.
Damn, I was trying to make it boring. Oh, well.